divided everything by 3? And is this where we kind of left off? We were like the half of B part?
We were down to x plus 3 over 2 squared.
Oh, okay.
We had it like...
So, just in general, when you are working with these problems, if you start with whole numbers or fractions, you have to work with whole numbers or fractions all the way through. There will be some where we work with decimals, and then you can work with decimals the whole way through. That said, when you take half of B, because your B value is 3, you have to write that as 3 halves, not 1.5. You have to keep it as a fraction. Then when we squared that, what did we get? 9/4. And then that's the value that we added to both sides. Okay, now if I gave you a problem just as a warm-up and I said factor that, I mean, because there's a fraction in there, everybody would probably flip out at me and say it can't be factored. But when you're doing complete and square, because when we do this part, it always sets this up to be able to be factored, we know we can factor it. And that's when the little hint or the little thing that happens every single time where whatever half of B was, that's what goes in the parentheses. That's a good thing to remember because then you don't have to sit and try to figure out what fraction is there because it's always whatever half of B was. So 3 halves. What am I laying? 3 halves goes into both parentheses. These parentheses should be always the same. You can always double check. 3 halves times 3 halves gives me 9/4, right?
Yep.
3 halves plus 3 halves gives me 3, doesn't it? This is 1.5 plus 1.5. What do I have to do here on the right side?
Add.
I have to add them. But I have to get what first before I add? Common denominators. What's my common denominator? 4. Which means this is going to become 16/4. Right? And then 16 plus 9 gives me 25. Okay. I'm going to write that as a squared binomial. And then what do I do to both sides? Square root. So on the right side we get x plus 3 halves. On the left side we get x plus 3 halves. On the right side, what's the square root of 25?
5.
What's the square root of 4? 2. So can I say this becomes 5 halves then? Sure. And make sure to have the plus or minus. Then your last step is to subtract 3 halves from both sides. And conveniently, you have the same denominator still. So can I add and subtract these fractions?
Yeah.
Fairly easily, yep. So negative 3 plus 5 gives me 2/2, which is just 1. And then negative 3 minus 5 gives me negative 8/2, which is negative 4. So those are my 2 answers. Okay, before we start working with example 3 and 4, I want you to get a whiteboard, mark your rag. I'm going to give you a couple of these to work on. I'm going to give you one that's just like normal numbers, and then one that makes you work with a fraction. Hey, I want you to do number... go with number 13. I want you number 13, and then I want you to number... start with number 13.
That's where I get confused.
We're following our notes right now, so you can either follow the steps on the front page or follow the example for example 1. So that's going to be a lot like number 13. Yes, sir. We'll start by writing down the then
shoot it if I shoot it up.
You don't even
When you're
have
done
the
with
double
ice cream,
check
just
so
let
up
us
there
know.
anyways.
That's where you're wrong, Bob.
Did
It says I need one.
Want me to do 22?
Seven.
For up there you go. Oh, I
It
didn't
says
do
I need one
17.
though.
We got pulled over. We got pulled over by a DNR.
I said I'd hit it. That we hit it with the truck.
Yeah, that still doesn't matter.
Work on the knife some more again.
Yeah, and there's a arrow stuck in it. Yeah, we hit it with a truck and it had an arrow in it.
I forgot to add
Why are you
that.
recording this? Oh.
So I just let it run.
I'm gonna freeze up.
You would rate that, dude.
I'm confused.
I'm not exactly sure.
No, I'm gonna go to some.
I wanna know how you
Stop, and I'm not too
Stop. Just watch the horse.
Whoa,
Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa.
I asked first.
Yeah.
I just need, okay.
I did already.
Hey. Where do you, how do you do that?
561.
Oh. Why is that? Oh, drag function 20? What is it? That's why it's 20? Okay. Can I just write this as negative 1/3? Since do I need to write it again? Is that good?
No, I've been waiting for this.
I love cooking.
Square.
I'm getting.
And then add that.
My friend was at class in the morning.
Okay, I think we're gonna pull it back together so we can practice a little bit more.
No way, I'm not done.
Briefly. You're good. Okay, whiteboards put in front of you, please.
Did I do this right?
Good job.
Well, it's still the square root of 6.
What?
Still the square root of 6.
I didn't.
Okay, whiteboards put in front of you, please.
Can I finish my phone? Would you brush? No, would you sit there? Sure.
Alright, I'll go.
Yeah. I don't know why you leave.
Okay, go to example 3. Okay, whiteboards should be put away at this point. You should have your notes back out. Okay, we're going to go through one more together, just so that we were a little more prepared to... Yeah, we're going to go through one more together. Alright, let's go with 2x squared minus 2x equals 9. Alright, this is solving. I was going to have you write an equation in vertex form, which is using the same process, but we're going to do one more solving. And this one's going to have fractions in it, just so that, again, if we don't practice them together, and I'm still expecting you to do them on your own, then it's not fair if we haven't actually done them together quite a bit. Alright. What's the first step to completing the square? What's usually the first step? Move C, but C is already on the other side, so then divide everything by 2. So we get x squared minus x equals 9 halves. Again, keep it as a fraction. Then the next step is completing the square, is where we actually set up the left side so that we can factor it. And that's where the half of b stuff comes in. A lot of us were getting the half of b. What's my b value here? Negative 1. What's half of negative 1? You have 1 and you cut in half. You have 0.5. And it's negative 1/2. Some of you were taking that value and adding it to both sides, but you have to do what to it first? We have to square it. Now, negative 1 squared is? Stick with me here. 2 squared is? 4. I'm taking half of b I'm squaring it, so we're squaring negative 1/2.
She's writing numbers down, Bob.
And now it's 1/4 when you square it. Okay. This is the number that gets added to both sides. Okay, so we get x squared minus x plus 1/4. Then on the other side we have 9/2 plus 1/4. You have to add it to both. Some of us were missing that step too, so just be careful. Now we factor the left. Now the nice thing about this method is that when you go to factor, it always follows the same pattern. One thing about the pattern is that your parentheses will always be the same. The other thing about the pattern is that whatever half of b was, that's the number that goes in the parentheses. So what was half of b? Negative 1/2. So when you factor, you don't have to do all that extra fancy work to factor. You can just know that it follows that pattern every time. So if we were to factor this, you'd get x minus 1/2 times x minus 1/2, and then we can always write it like that. And maybe that's a good thing to write a little note for yourself. Whatever half of b was, that's the value in the factor. Again, because when we start working with decimals, like when you start using this method to solve stuff that has decimals in it, that's going to be how we usually factor, is by using just the pattern. That's great. Okay, 9/2 plus 1/4. I have to get common denominators. The common denominator here will be 4. So I have to multiply this one by 2/2. And then that will give me 19/4. What do I do now? Square root, both sides. And you get x minus 1/2 equals plus or minus. Now,
Square root of 19/2.
good. Square root of 19/2. 19 can't be broken down any more than it is, so we're going to leave it as square root of 19. And then put the 2. And then my final step is to do what?
1/2 to both of those.
Yeah, you're trying to get x by itself. So x will equal 1/2 plus or minus square root of 19/2. Now, you will have a quiz over this section on Thursday, which means we're going... Wait, tomorrow's Thursday. Okay. We're not going to... I'm not going to quiz you on this stuff, because obviously we haven't gone through it yet. But you will have a quiz with a couple of problems on it. They're very similar to these. So I would study these notes tonight. You're not getting any extra homework, but if you haven't done the homework, I suggest doing that before tomorrow's quiz so you feel a little bit better prepared. Okay? I think the bell's ringing.
Next up, follows the
It is. Career Center, you can go.